Have you ever wondered how truly wild the Wild West was? Well, saddle up, partner, because we're about to take a gallop through history to uncover the gritty truth. The Wild West, as it turns out, was a lot less glamorous and a lot more perilous than the silver screen would have you believe. You've probably seen a fair share of westerns where the hero and villain face off in a dramatic quick-draw duel. The tension mounts, their hands hover over their holsters, and in a flash of cinematic brilliance, the duel is decided. But in reality, these duels were far from the norm. Instead of being choreographed dance-offs with bullets, they were often impulsive, messy affairs. Picture this, a couple of cowboys, fueled by boredom and too much cheap whiskey, deciding to settle their differences with their six-shooters. No dramatic countdown, no crowd of onlookers, just a hasty, often clumsy exchange of gunfire. This isn't to say that guns weren't prevalent in the Wild West. They were, but they were tools, not toys. They were used for hunting, for protection against wild animals or bandits, and yes, sometimes for settling disputes. But the romanticized image of the noble gunslinger defending his honor in a high-noon showdown is just that, an image. The reality of life in the Wild West was harsh. It was a time of exploration and expansion, of opportunity and danger. It was a time where law and order were often overshadowed by survival and necessity. It was a time where life was cheap and death was just a misstep away. So the West was wild, but not quite in the way you might imagine. It was more than just duels and daring deeds. It was a time of grit, of struggle, and of survival. And that, my friends, is the real Wild West. Now let's delve into some infamous encounters and tragic ends. The gunfight at the OK Corral, a notorious event in Western history, was far from the heroic standoffs often depicted in movies. Instead, it was a chaotic, deadly encounter involving Wyatt Earp and his brothers against the Clanton-McLaury gang. This event, like many others, underscored the unpredictable and dangerous nature of life in the Wild West. Switching gears, let's talk about Bill Pickett. Known for his unrivaled bulldogging skills, Pickett was a shining star in rodeos, but his fame didn't shield him from the risks tied to his profession. One day, a horse he was roping kicked back, trampling him in the process. That tragic incident marked the end of Pickett, a man who lived his life in the saddle. And then there's Calamity Jane. Despite her fame, Jane's life was anything but glamorous. Exploited for her reputation and battling alcoholism, she spent her last years in obscurity and poverty. Her end was a stark reminder of how challenging life could be, even for those who achieved fame in the Wild West. We also have the story of Charles Earl Bowles, better known as Black Bart. As one of the most successful stagecoach robbers in the West, he was a symbol of the outlaw life. But even Bowles couldn't escape the harsh realities of the era. After enjoying a successful criminal career, he eventually retired, disappearing into the annals of history. These figures, while famous, met untimely and tragic ends, underscoring the harsh realities of life in the West. Their stories serve as a reminder of the perils and hardships that were part and parcel of living in the Wild West. It was an era of danger and uncertainty, where survival was far from guaranteed, and where fame and fortune often came with a heavy price. Life in the Wild West was not without its health hazards and dangerous encounters. Indeed, while the quick-draw duels and outlaw showdowns might get the most attention, it was often the less dramatic dangers that posed the most significant threats. Illnesses were rampant, and with little understanding of how diseases spread, epidemics like cholera could sweep through towns with devastating speed. The lack of clean water and proper sanitation made such outbreaks all too common. And if you were unlucky enough to fall ill, medical treatment was often just as perilous as the disease itself. Doctors were few and far between, and their knowledge was limited. They relied on rudimentary tools and methods, with treatments often involving painful procedures and ineffective remedies. But it wasn't just health hazards that posed a risk. The life of an outlaw, while often glamorized in tales and legends, was fraught with danger. Take the infamous Jesse James, for instance. Known for his daring robberies and audacious exploits, he met an unexpected end, not in a hail of bullets or a daring escape, but at the hands of a former ally. Robert Ford, a member of James's own gang, shot him in the back while he was unarmed, all in the hopes of claiming a reward. It was a grim reminder that in the Wild West, even the most notorious outlaws weren't safe from betrayal and sudden death. Life in the Wild West was a high-stakes gamble where every day brought new dangers, from health hazards to the threat of violence. And even for the most notorious, the West held a high risk of mortality. Whether it was disease, the harsh conditions, or the ever-present threat of violence, survival was never a guarantee. It was a place where only the toughest, or perhaps the luckiest, could hope to endure. As the Wild West era started to decline, so did the fates of many of its most notable figures. One such figure was Kit Carson, a frontiersman known for his toughness and resilience. Carson was a mountain man, a wilderness guide, an Indian agent, and an American Army officer. But even the most rugged of men cannot escape the inevitable. Carson's life was marked by loss and hardship. His first 2 wives died young, and he lost several children to disease. His third wife, Josefa, died shortly after giving birth to their 8th child, and Carson himself succumbed to an aortic aneurysm just a month later. His last words were reportedly, "Goodbye, friends. Adios, compadres." He was no stranger to the harsh realities of the Wild West, but it was not a bullet or a blade that ended his journey. It was illness and grief. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Charles Earl Bowles, better known as Black Bart. Bowles was an English-born outlaw who became one of the most successful stagecoach robbers in the West. He was notorious for his polite manners and the poems he left behind at the scene of his crimes. Bowles committed his last robbery in November of 1883 and was captured shortly after. After serving 4 years of a 6-year sentence, he was released from San Quentin prison. When asked by reporters if he would return to robbing stagecoaches, Bowles replied, "No, gentlemen, I'm through with crime," and he remained true to his word. After his release, Bowles disappeared from public view. Some say he went to live with family in the East, while others suggest he assumed a new identity and continued his life in the West. His fate remains a mystery, much like the era in which he thrived. As the sun set on the Wild West era, so too did it set on the lives and legends of these figures. The Wild West was indeed a perilous place, filled with danger at every turn. In our exploration today, we've unearthed the sobering realities that lay beneath the romanticized veneer of this era. Quick-draw duels, though less glamorous than portrayed, were unpredictable and deadly. They were impulsive acts, often fueled more by alcohol and boredom than any noble pursuit of justice. We've discussed infamous encounters like the gunfight at the OK Corral, where the Earp brothers' clash with the Clanton-McLaury gang turned into a bloody, disorderly affair. And we've examined the tragic ends of famous figures like Bill Pickett, a rodeo star whose life was snuffed out in a brutal encounter with a horse, and Calamity Jane, who, despite her fame, met a heartbreaking end in obscurity and poverty. The Wild West was not just about gunslingers and outlaws. It was a land riddled with health hazards. Diseases like cholera were rampant, and medical treatments were rudimentary at best, often causing more harm than good. We've also highlighted the fate of outlaws and frontiersmen. Jesse James, the infamous bandit, was betrayed and killed by a former ally, while Kit Carson, a rugged frontiersman, succumbed to illness and grief after losing his family. And then there was Black Bart, the successful stagecoach robber who disappeared into obscurity. The Wild West was a time and place of harsh realities, where life was often brutish and short. It was not a world for the faint-hearted, and certainly not as glamorously wild as depicted in pop culture. Would you have survived in this unforgiving era? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to hit like and subscribe for more in-depth content from Anonymous Analyst.